have amongst us Dr. Gillian Dooley from Flinders University. Dr. Dooley worked at Flinders University for 27 years before retiring in May 2017. She was in the position of Special Collections Librarian from 1999 to 2015 and Publishing Support Librarian from 2016 to 2017. She graduated from Flinders University with a PhD in English in 2001. She was the founding editor of the Flinders Institute for Research in the Humanities electronic journals Transitional Literature and Writers Conversation. Dr. Dooley has published monographs, articles, and several scholarly editions. Her research interests include the writers J. M. Coetzee, Irish Murdoch, V. S. Naipaul, Jane Austen, and maritime explorer Matthew Flinders. She is a regular book reviewer for various journals and magazines, including Australia. Ma'am, on behalf of the entire department of HSS and NIT Sikkim, we welcome you for the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. PowerPoint screen?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. Thank you. Well, good morning. Good morning. It's afternoon where I am today. My will be in thinking about to go back and think why do we publish, and then what to publish, and then where to publish, and then how to publish. So it's really it's sort of progressing in that way. I heard and so who I am, so we'll get on to why we should publish. So you know, publication is a sort of assumption of an academic career, that you will want to publish your work, and of course you will want to publish your work to communicate your ideas and what you've found in your research, to protect your IP or intellectual property, make sure that you know, you can claim the ideas and the research that you have done yourself as your own, rather than letting someone else get ahead of you to publish before you. And also to, of course, build up your reputation and your profile in the academic world, and more broadly in the wider world of, depending what your discipline is, what your interest is. If you're, say, a historian or a literary scholar, you may well want to go more broadly than just your colleagues. And then what to publish. So once you've decided where, you know, why you're publishing, then that might make a difference about what you publish and where you publish. So what you publish, sometimes, you know, you feel you need to, or somebody, perhaps someone is suggesting that you should have some publications, but you don't feel that your current research is yet ready to go out into the world. But often there is work that you've done that's worthwhile even before you've started on the current project. Say if you're undertaking a research degree, a PhD, or if you're an early research scholar working on some new project, you may feel that your current work is not ready, but you may well have something from your former activities, from even your undergraduate degree. I mean, I've published articles from my undergraduate, my upper, third year undergraduate degree in journals. So, they would need some work. They'd need a bit of polishing and a bit of perhaps filling out. But it's always worth thinking about, okay, what you have written already that might be worth looking at and submitting for publication. Another thought is to present at conferences. And of course, that's not quite the way it was 6 months ago, a year ago, when we could all go to conferences and meet colleagues and discuss ideas and all those wonderful things that we used to be able to do. But there are still plenty of conferences going on, and I'm in the position of convening a conference which is coming up in a couple of months, and we're doing our very best to make it as interactive as possible, given that it has to be mostly online. So, take all the take all the opportunities you can. If you hear a paper that you find particularly interesting, contact the author if you can. Email the author and start a discussion with them, because that's a very important part of the academic life. We can't just seal ourselves off from each other. And then once you've presented, if you're presenting at a conference, write up your work for that conference into something that can be published. It usually can't be exactly the same. It usually needs to be expanded with more perhaps supporting material added. You might write in a slightly different register for publication, but still it's always worth, and the beauty of writing up what you've learned what you've presented at a conference is that it's been out in the public, and hopefully you've been able to discuss it with other scholars and get some new ideas about where it could go and other possibilities for your research. And then, of course, beyond the academic article or the academic book chapter, there's also a lot of scope for blog articles or for magazine articles, online or offline. You could, if you've got something that's topical, that's of general interest, you may well be able to publish something for a broader readership, which will do your reputation no harm if it's a good piece of work and you're getting out there. I think that's a worthy thing to do. Of course, you must always, particularly if you're a research scholar or a fairly junior academic, it's always important to consult with your peers and your more experienced colleagues about what they suggest, because different disciplines have different ways of going about publication, perhaps even different institutions, certainly different countries would have different cultures of publication. So what I'm talking about is very general, based on my own experience, which is and the experience of people I know, international. So once again, what to publish. There's obviously, the research study, what you've actually found in your research. If you're doing a particular something for in a social science type context, and you've done a survey and you've found the results and you've got published, then that's fine. If you're perhaps in the humanities or something, that's a different sort of ongoing process of discovery and thinking and refining your thoughts. Research study process. Yes, you can, it can be good to take a step back, not only write about the content and the subject that you're studying, but think about how you've gone about doing your research. And you might think perhaps that this doesn't really apply in sort of humanist research that we do, where the methodology is perhaps not so obvious and not so set out. But I think actually it can be very, very useful to take a step back and think, okay, how did I go about doing this research, and what are the steps I go through, and to examine that, and to think about ways of varying that perhaps, or what's valuable about the type of research that you do. Of course, the literature review can be a good thing to publish, very much depending on the culture of your discipline. Some disciplines, I know some academics who say, or academic editors who say, please don't send me your literature review, I'm not interested. Other journal editors would perhaps be welcome a literature review of a topical and interesting subject. So these kind of, there's all sorts of ways of approaching what to publish, rather than just publishing the results of your research study. And these other things, conceptual analysis. Now, book reviews, we've got that there. I'm, as a long-time journal editor, I'm a great believer in book reviews. In fact, from every point of view, from the point of view of a scholar who likes to read books, as an author who's published a few books, and as an editor. I think doing a book review, looking closely and carefully at someone else's work, can be a very, very useful thing to do. It's a service to the profession. It may not have the kind of kudos of a peer-reviewed journal article, but it's a very useful service to the profession. If you've published a monograph or a book, sometimes you don't get more than 2 or 3 reviews ever of your hard work that you've worked, perhaps 2, 3, 4 years to create this piece of work. And if you don't even get 2 or 3 reviews, that's very dispiriting. So it helps your colleagues as well. And it can actually create some links with the authors and across disciplines. So all these things help with building your sort of academic networks. And I say that not just in a sort of cold, calculating way. I think to be an academic is to be part of a community. And we can call it a network, but it's a community of an intellectual community that is what being a scholar and an academic is about. So all these types of things are important. Now, what to publish again? We're thinking. If you've recently finished your PhD, you might think, right, well, I've done this PhD, or this thesis, this dissertation, it's around about the right size for a book. I could just send it off to a publisher and they'll publish it. And some publishers will actually do that. They will just publish your book. publish your thesis as a book without very much revision, but that's not necessarily a good idea. You know, sometimes your thesis sometimes the thesis is fine to be a book, but often a thesis is, you know, a thesis is in a way an apprentice work. It might not necessarily, it has to do certain things which a book might not need to do. It has to have a very, very thorough literature review, for example, which most books won't particularly need. You'd have a good bibliography, but you wouldn't necessarily have to demonstrate in the way you do with a thesis that you know every single book that's ever been written about your subject. Other projects beyond the thesis, I believe that, you know, editing a volume of other scholars' work, so an anthology on some subject of your interest, is a very valuable thing, particularly in the humanities. It's a recognised and valuable way of making publishing. Scholarly editions of primary resources, and that of course depends also on your discipline, but you know, particularly in history or in literature, you know, how wonderful it is that so many that people have gone back and found the diaries of people or of important people, or the collections of their letters, or those sort of things, and published them, because those books are just so useful as a foundation for further scholarly research. I would say of my, I don't know, 8 or 10 books that I've been involved in as co-editor or author, one of my probably one of my best known works among the academic field is the collection of interviews with Iris Murdoch that I did in 2003. And even though it wasn't a classical academic book, it was a collection of interviews that I'd gathered together, and I put an introduction on it and an index, and I edited the interviews. That continues to be a useful book in a way, perhaps, that a monograph that you write 20 years later, that monograph might. Colleague from the library here in Flinders put together or found for us, and you can see that the amount of scholarly publication is going up and up, and that's 5 years ago already. Humanities titles are a large proportion of the academic book titles that are published. You know, that's no surprise. It's the sciences don't publish so many books anymore. It's more humanities and social sciences where books are published, rather than journal articles or conference papers. Now, where to publish? That's the next thing. So once you've decided what to publish, and of course these aren't so neat. It's not so neat. You know, you might find a publication opportunity and look at it the other way around and say, oh, I can publish something in this journal, and look back at what you might like to publish there. So either, you know, there's no set path that you have to follow. So there are considerations, you know, there's the likelihood of acceptance. So, you know, I think it's always good. It's a good idea to aim high, sure, but if you consider that some journals actually pride themselves on the fact that some journals pride themselves on the fact that they have a 95% rejection rate. That means that it's a very, you know, the likelihood that you will be one of those people who will be accepted, those 5%, is much lower. So it's things like that, you know, the very, very prestigious journals. It's wonderful if you do get published in them, but you know, in a way, perhaps it might be better to start with something that perhaps had a 50% rejection rate rather than a 95% rejection rate. But of course, you want a publisher or a journal with a good reputation and a good visibility and good potential impact. And that's a real, to me, that's almost the most important thing, the potential impact. Who is going to be reading the journal where your publication is? Is it a good place for you to publish your research? Will your academic community, the people you want to be talking with, you communicating with, will they be reading that journal? If it's an open access journal, then that's fine. You can share your article around with people. But sometimes open access journals charge charge authors quite a lot to publish in them. So these are all considerations that you must take into account. Timely publication, how long will it take? You know, sometimes it can take years for an article to appear. I think if you get an article published within 6 to 12 months, I think you're doing very well from the time that you submit it. And then, of course, philosophical and ethical issues. If you know, is this a journal that, you know, that has any problems? And perhaps if it's an organisation you have some ethical problems with, then, you know, perhaps it's something to think about. But that's, of course, you know, what you would do with almost any decision in life, isn't it? Measures of quality, yes. Now, this is my colleague knows all about these things. I don't know so much about them. There are all these measures of quality, and I think they all have their problems, because they are measuring something which is really almost impossible to measure in that sort of quantitative way. You know, for me, I would rather talk to my colleagues and ask them what they think. You know, is this a good journal? What do you think? But if sometimes I understand in some research environments, in some academic systems that exist these days, these measures of quality are very important. So there's the impact factor, there's the source normalized impact per paper, there's the SCImago journal rank, the eigenfactor score, and then there's Google Scholar metrics. So all these things are important to sort of know about, but they're not sort of gospel. They're not the only way of looking at the type of the quality of a journal. So the impact factor measures how often scholars and researchers have cited articles in the past 2 years, and the higher the number, the better the journal's impact factor. And they have to be in one of those science citation or social sciences citation indexes, and therefore not all journals have an impact factor of this type, and that's a really important point. You know, it's a little bit of a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's well to bear in mind what these things are actually measuring and what they're trying to measure. Now, open access, I talked about that a little before. So open access obviously means that your readers can access your work free to the readers. It's free to the readers. There's no charge. They don't have to subscribe. They don't have to buy anything, and it's online access to digital resources. Then there are this is a bit too simple probably. There's green open access, where authors can deposit a version of their published work in an open access digital repository. Sometimes the universities have those repositories for their staff. Other times you've got organisations like academia.edu, ResearchGate. Those sort of organisations, you can upload your articles, but you must have permission from your publisher to do that, and you must know which version you are allowed to upload. Gold open access, that's where authors pay a fee at the time of publication to enable open access. I have a bit of a problem with that from an equity point of view. I think it doesn't seem to me to be a very fair way to go. A lot of publishers do allow for a remission of those fees for some scholars from different parts of the world or certain circumstances. So it probably is worthwhile finding out about that. I think it's difficult. There is a little bit of a problem about funding academic research, and there are a number of publication categories, and that's things like the journals that I have run. There's no fees for the authors, and there's no cost to the reader. So, but there's a hidden cost to get the journal published. Everyone's doing it in their own time or as part of their university work. So there is a hidden cost there but it's not quantified in money. So yes, the open access, there are various lists. I hope you'll be able to have a look at this this PowerPoint later if you're interested. I can share it if we need to, and you can look up some of these websites. Sherpa's list, How Open Is It guide, and Beale's list of predatory open access publishers. It's always worth having a look there to see where your journal is fitting into that landscape. So yes, the green open access I've talked about. Most journals allow some form of self-archiving, even if they're print journals or journals that charge for the readers. But it's not usually the very last version, the final version, the published version. And do be very careful about predatory publishing. I think as academics we often get targeted by the predatory publishers who say, yes, we want to publish your work, we're very impressed with such and such a publication. Sometimes it's just a little book review or something, and we would love to publish your work. And then, how long is it you know, before they actually tell you that you owe them £3,000 or something like that. So I think it's very, very, I would be very, very cautious about anything that is an unsolicited email, that you just receive an email out of the blue. And also if they say we'll publish your work within 2 weeks or 4 weeks or something, that's not the way normal scholarly publishing works. You need, publishing does take time, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. Now, how to publish. So once you've decided on your publication, your journal or your whatever you've decided to do, observe their guidelines. It's very important to look on their website for the author's guidelines and provide the article of the right length that they want, of the type that they want. You know, if they don't publish literature reviews, there's no point in sending them a literature review. It needs to be within their subject guides. You know, you just need to be aware of exactly what this journal does. Sometimes, you know, you might think, oh, this is a good journal, but then once you look at their author guidelines, you'll realise that, oh, well, perhaps my work is not going to fit there, and you just have to go and look at another place. So once you've found your journal, you send it off. You send it off to the journal with any kind of usually with a reputable journal. You should get an acknowledgement of receipt fairly quickly. Quite often these days it will be an automated uploading system. Not always. Sometimes you will send it to an email address, to the editor's email address or something like that, but other times you'll use one of the Scholar One or Open Journal systems, or one of those systems, to upload your article, and then you will get an automatic response. But you should get, however, with whatever sort of system it is, you should really get a response from an author, from an editor or an editorial assistant quite within a week or two, and with any luck they will keep you keep in touch with you about how your article is progressing through the system. So the peer review process is the review process is usually the editors will read the article and make a decision about whether it's suitable for the journal, and whether it should go through to peer review or whether it should be rejected straight away. And being rejected straight away doesn't mean that your work is bad. It just means it necessarily it doesn't. It just means that your work is not suitable for the journal. Dealing with peer review reports and requests for revision. Now this is the really hard work, I think, of an academic career, because you believe in it and you've sent it off, and two or three other people have read it, and maybe one of them loves it and the other one, you know, has a lot of arguments with it and wants you to change a whole lot of things. This can be really difficult, and it's sometimes very difficult not to take it personally. This is you don't worry about the detail of this, but this gives you a little picture. This flow chart here gives you a little bit of an idea. This is from the Elsevier peer review process of how complicated the peer reviewing process can be, and that's why it takes time. The academic world exists on the assumption that work isn't published without being reviewed, without being checked by other scholars for for its findings, for its lucidity, for its good argument, for all those things that an academic article needs to have. But it's a human system. It's not some sort of perfect system where you can't. Nothing can go wrong. Sometimes you can get somebody who's a peer reviewing your work, who's just so totally out of sympathy with what you've done that it's best just to say, well, okay, we'll forget this journal and we'll move on to another one and hope we find more sympathetic reviewers. But you must always also, of course, look at you must also look at the comments and make a look at the comments critically and calmly and see what there is that you can take from it. Can you still hear me? Okay, there was a little bit of interference then. Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay. Right, time frames for different types of publication. These can be quite, I'll go back there. These can be, as I said, quite wide. A well-run journal where everything goes well and they like your paper and you don't have to do any revisions, that's the dream come true. In that case, if the journal is something that's published regularly and it isn't a very high demand journal, then you might get published in 6 months. One thing about publishing in the real top flight journals, the top of the top, is even if you do get accepted, you might have to wait 2 years until they've got a spot in their journal. So you can think, oh well, I've won the prize, but you still, you still have to wait. Quite often, have to wait until the backlog is published. So that's another thing to bear in mind with publishing in those very prestigious journals. And with a book, with an edited book, there are so many more possibilities for delay with an edited book, because you've got a group of other authors and an editor who's trying to put them all together as one unified book. Whereas with a journal article, your article is more likely to be able to be slotted in with other articles which aren't necessarily closely related. But if you're part of a book which is like a joint project, it only takes one or two of the other authors to be a little bit slow or need more work done on their article. Everything's slowed up. So even though it's wonderful, I think, to be part of those sort of projects, I'm lucky that I've got 2 of those books that I have chapters in coming out at the moment. They're just about to arrive in my inbox, I think. But they do sometimes take a very long time. Sometimes they can take 2, 3, 4, even 5 years. I've even heard 7 years from the beginning, from the first thought to actually publishing. So these things are all things to take into account. Rejection, yes, as I said, rejection doesn't actually mean necessarily that your work is not up to standard. If you can try and find out what look at what the rejection is saying. Look beyond, because it's hurtful. It hurts, and I know that I know this. After publishing, I've been publishing for 25 years or something, and I can still get rejections, and it's still quite upsetting. But you have to think, well, is it because they have expectations that of academic work that I don't agree with? It doesn't mean that you should necessarily change your work to fit in with their concepts of what they think you should do. But it's always worth thinking, what can I improve? What do I not want to change? What do I want to change? If your article's rejected somewhere, obviously speak to colleagues. Get some, don't take it too personally. Learn from the experience. Understand that it might be just a square peg in a round hole type of situation. So you're not necessarily, you might be just in the wrong place. You need to find the right place for your article, or your book or your project. And talking to colleagues is often a very good way of doing that. But also thinking to yourself, okay, what is my article? What is it, and how does it, where else might it fit, and how to name who are also publishing academics. It's useful to set up yourself a Google Scholar profile. That's of course open to everyone in the world to look at your Google Scholar profile. You can then, once again, you can claim your publications there that are available online. So that's the Google Scholar is quite a useful tool, and of course it's free and open access. So it's a good thing to look at and to check out the possibilities of Google Scholar profile. And as I said before, if you're allowed to upload an open access version of your paper to one of those repositories online. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Please let me know, but that's all I have. Thank you. So stop sharing. So if anyone has anything to ask me, please let me know. Perhaps type into the text box, or is somebody?
Dr. Dooley, I have a question actually. This is Dr. Tripathi, and I have a question to ask. Can you listen to me? Before Anjali and Ankita can come up with the questions from the chat box, I just wanted to ask one question. Sometimes it happens that we get contradictory reviews of the paper. So how to deal with that? We get two reviews from two different reviewers, and both the reviews we found they are contradictory in nature. So how to deal with that situation?
I'm sorry, I can't hear. There's too much interference.
I believe now you can listen to me. I believe
Yes.
I'm audible now. So before my colleagues Ankita and Anjali come up with more questions from the chat box, I have a question to ask. Sometimes it happens that when we submit our research papers for reviews and publication, we get different reviews, and sometimes we found them contradictory in nature. Sometimes two reviewers or three reviewers, they put up reviews which are quite contradictory in nature. So how to deal with that situation?
The contradictory peer reviews, where you have, yes, that happens to me all the time. One peer reviewer thinks it's the most wonderful thing they've ever read. The other peer review thinks it's not worth publishing at all and needs a lot more work. A lot of how to deal with that is you need to talk to your editor about that, because will your editor, what does your editor think? Because the editor is the one who will actually, in the end, make the decision about whether to publish. So if you you can read those reviews, and you can say, well, okay, I agree with some part of it, but I don't agree with this other part of it, and you can put a proposal to the editor. You can say, well, I'm willing to change this part of my paper, but I'm not willing to change that part of this aspect of my paper, because it's still your publication. So and I think you should always be aware as well. You should always bear in mind that the positive review has a right to be heard as well as the negative review. So I think you need to negotiate. If you want to go ahead with that publication, sometimes you just don't you don't want to. You think it's better to just cut your losses and go somewhere else. But other times, I think it's always worth discussing this peer review with your editors, your editor, and see what their point of view is. See what they would want you to do.
Thank you.
I can see some questions in the chat.
Hello, ma'am. Yes.
Hello.
Ma'am, a participant named Barnali, she had a question that what is the role of ORCID ID?
Oh, the role of ORCID ID is to be a unique identifier for each researcher. So so you create your own ORCID ID, and then you register your publications with that, against that ORCID ID. And so nobody else, so if there are two people with the same name, so, two academics with the same name, you won't get those publications mixed up. But it's also a good way of it's somewhere you can go online and look up other people's list of publications as well. So it's like a big database of everyone's publications, and the big publishers will actually contribute their publications to that database as well. So sometimes you get an email saying you have some publications to review. So you go into ORCID and you look down the list and you say, yes, this one is my publication, this one is not my publication. So it allows you to allows the internet to have an accurate list of your publications, rather than mixing you up with someone else with the same name.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, another query, and being a young researcher myself, I too have the same queries. This is from Bonala Kondala. How to select journal that take lot of time, sometimes even a year, and how many publications should one have in a particular year?
Yes. Well, it's very, very hard. But you can ask the editor. You can always ask the editor what. You can write to the editor and say, and give them. And as an editor, I often used to get emails from authors saying, you know, I have this article. If it's accepted, how long would it take to publish? So I would be able that, you know, then I could let them know, and they could then make a decision based on what I could tell them. So I think it's always worth asking. Otherwise, you can ask your colleagues. If you're a member of some social media group, you know, with colleagues like Facebook or whatever, you could ask those people. It's always difficult to know. And what was the other part of that question?
Ma'am, how many publications should one have in a particular year?
There's no rule about that. Some institutions, I think, some universities I hear are saying you must have 3 publications a year or 5 publications a year or whatever, depending whether you're a professor or a lecturer or whatever you are. There's no sort of blanket rule about that. If you look back in the sort of classic era, 30, 50 years ago, some very famous scholars have very, very, very few publications compared to what we're expecting these days. You might think you just want to work very hard on getting, you know, 1 or 2 publications a year, or else you might just, you know, there's no rule about that. I can't tell you a rule about that.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, this is a query from Padmaja Behra, and he's asking, could you please elaborate on publishing in paid versus unpaid journals?
Paid, you mean? Okay, so there are the journals that there are different funding models for different journals. So some journals the author pays to publish, and those fees can be really, really high. They can be, you know, 3,000 pounds, UK pounds, or, you know, 5,000 US dollars. It's an enormous amount of money. Unless you're part of a rich university in a rich country, I can't see how anyone can afford it. Some of those journals or publishers do have schemes where they allow people, they remit those fees or reduce those fees for other, you know, for countries that aren't so rich, or people who are perhaps in students rather than working academics. But I don't know. I mean, I never publish in those journals where you have to pay, because I don't have any access to research funding. And it seems to me that there are plenty of journals which where you don't have to pay, which are perfectly reputable. Some journals, of course, are subscription journals, so the reader, you know, which is the old-fashioned way, you know, the reader you publish an article in a journal, and then the reader pays, you know, £5 or whatever, and buys a copy of the journal and goes and takes it home and reads it. And that's quite old-fashioned now. Another way, I suppose, is for the publishers to publish to publish through one of the really big databases like ProQuest or EBSCO, and a library will pay a subscription to that. So if you're a member of that institution, then you can have free access to those journals. So there are so many different models. It's very hard to generalize, but just be, it's important to know what you're doing. To know what you're getting into from the beginning, not just to sort of go in feet first without doing the research into a journal before you publish or before you submit to it. I think there was a question about what was that one? How to identify? Oh, I know. The one, there was somebody, Samir Chetri, asked about the chances of a peer-reviewed paper getting published by an independent researcher. I don't think there's any problem with that, and it does help some some publishers are funny about that, and some are okay. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if people are doing good work, that's all they need to do. They might need to have qualifications, I suppose. They would be unlikely to be producing good academic work if they didn't already have an academic education, academic qualifications such as a PhD, but or we're working towards one. But I think it does help to have an affiliation, even if it's not a paid position, but an affiliation with an institute, an academic institution. And I've always done that since I started publishing seriously about 10, 15 years ago, I suppose, publishing a lot. I've taken out honorary academic status. So my status with my university is as an unpaid honorary researcher. I've never been a paid academic. I had a career as a librarian, but I wasn't a paid academic. So I've been able to publish on the basis of having an honorary affiliation with an institution, and that's been very useful. But I've also published scholars who don't have an affiliation, a current affiliation with the university. Other editors might be different. I can't say.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. We have a question from M. Ramaswamy, and he wants to ask how to write critical review.
How to write a critical review. I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean by a critical review. I suppose, do you mean perhaps how to write a peer review? So if you are actually in the position of peer reviewing someone else's articles, how to go about that? That is a difficult question, and like many things in academic life, it's not clear cut. But you would need to, you need to read with an open mind. You need to read the work and think, well, is this something I would be happy to read in a journal article, in a academic journal? Would I find it acceptable? How would I improve it? I don't think you should think, is this what I would have written? That's the worst thing to think, because you don't, everyone has a different point of view and a different approach, and that's the valuable thing about academic life. But you do need to look for the value in the article, and to be honest and not to but to be honest and not too unkind. I don't know. That's about the best I can say. Anything else? I see
yes,
some.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Another participant wants to know if how could we find out if a journal is predatory or not?
Well, there's. I told you. I gave one on one of the slides. There was something called Beall's list. BEALLS list. So that is a list that has been compiled by someone called Jeffrey Beall, who's an American academic or librarian, and he has compiled this list of journals that he has found to be predatory. So it's always worth looking it up there, and he won't just list the journal. He'll say why what he thinks. And he's also got a lot of good information there about what to look for. But basically, it's the things that look too good to be true. It's the things that are saying, we've read your article such and such, and we were very, very impressed, and we want you to submit your work to us, and it will be published within 4 weeks. This is all too good to be true. So that's a very good, indication that that's a predatory journal. It might possibly be genuine, but that would be something that would raise the alarm signals to me. And do make sure before you commit yourself that you know exactly what it is. I mean, you can Google the article, you can Google the journal, and there are a lot of online chat sites, and you look at the journal's website, if it has a website, and that might tell you, how much it'll cost you to publish a journal article. I mean, recently I got a request by email, which sounded very flattering. It said, we would like to make a podcast based on your recent article. We're really impressed by your recent article, and we'd like to make a podcast, and we'll get professional actors to read your work, and it all sounded great. And then I looked at their website, and they were going to charge, the basic thing was £400 UK pounds. So they didn't say anything about that in the email, so I just didn't respond to that, because it's best not to respond. So I think just be cautious. Just do your research. I mean, you can just Google things and find out all sorts of information about them, or you can look at Beall's list, those sort of things as well.
Yes, ma'am. Should I go on? There are a few queries.
Oh, yes. If there's anything I can help with, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, someone named Samir Chetri is asking, what are some of the difficulties or disadvantages, if any, of publishing in high-impact journals?
Well, I mean, if everything goes well and your article is accepted and you don't have to do too many changes. You know, it can be wonderful. But it's just the unlikeliness of any of us getting into those journals because because of the way that I don't know quite how it works everywhere, but I know in Australia in 2008, so that's 12 years ago, a ranking system was drawn up where a lot of journals were ranked according to A star, A, B, C, D, and journals were put into those ranking systems, and some journals weren't there at all. Other journals were told, you know, given B's or C's or A pluses, A stars, and our Australian Research Council issued this list, and then there was so many problems with that list that they withdrew that list in the next round of rankings, which was 5 years later. But the list is still out there, and so a journal that was called an A-star journal in that list, and that's from 12 years ago, remember, that is still known as sort of, there's this shadow of this ghost of that ranking still in the air all around the world, I think. Those journals will be getting, you know, 5 times as many submissions as other journals, because they've got that, they've been given that rank. And so the journals further down the list, which might actually be just as good, it's just this rather random system that was imposed. The other journals might be just as good, but they are told, you know, they don't get so many submissions. So in a way, they might be better to submit to, because they are more likely to look at your article seriously. They're more likely to ignore small little things like perhaps a little errors in formatting or something like that. I mean, the thing about going to a journal where you're one of hundreds and hundreds of submissions is that they will eliminate your article because you haven't, you know, done the right referencing style, or you haven't done the spacing the right way, or, you know, just very small things. They will only look at things that are absolutely perfect, whereas someone who's further down the list will take more seriously their submissions, because there are more, they don't get so many, and they have more time to look seriously at all the submissions and to decide which ones are actually of value in themselves rather than by sort of surface. So that's one. That's just one sort of outcome of that rather ridiculous ranking system, which is now obsolete, gone away. The Research Council says no, we don't go by that anymore. Don't look at that anymore. But there are still copies of it everywhere, and it's very hard to live that down, to get rid of that once it's sort of in the air. Now, so somebody's asked me, Ranuk Singh has said, what do you think about referring to publications not written in English if they're written in some other languages? If you're bilingual, I think you've got a much wider world than the rest of us, and the monolingual people amongst us. If you can cite material in other languages, that's wonderful, if it's relevant, obviously. And what you would need to do would be to make sure that the readers of your journal, of your article, would be able to read it. So you might need to translate it into the language in which you're publishing. But I don't know of any editor who would have a problem with referring to, citing material in other languages, as long as you translate it and provide the source. What else have we got? If someone is publishing 2 or more papers from the same dissertation or thesis, is it acceptable? Yes, of course, as long as it's not the same research. You can, a journal article extracted from, most theses or dissertations can, you can extract much more than one article from it. You can, depending on your thesis. I mean, perhaps some of them might just need to be condensed down into one, but usually you would have several chapters, and perhaps each chapter might make a journal article, depending on the type of work. There's always a question. In a long publishing career, you sometimes and so it's even happened to me that I've submitted an article to one journal and kind of forgotten that I did that, or they hadn't got back to me, and so I assumed that it was they weren't going to publish it, and then submitted to someone else, and so I've actually got this same journal article published in 2 journals. That's happened to me a couple of times. It's probably not recommended, but it's probably not the end of the world. So you do have to be careful about not pulling material from one article into another. I think if you publish the same article in 2 different places, that can be okay, as long as it's recognisable as the same article. Sometimes, to save time, you might sort of think, oh, I've already written about this, and put that in your introduction, and then if you come to publish that for a talk or something, if you come to publish that later, you might think, oh, hang on, I better take that out or revise it or paraphrase it because I've already used that material. So it's it can be quite complicated, and it can be quite complicated to keep track of once you've published, once you've got a few dozen publications. It can be quite complicated to keep track of where you've submitted things where. So, but it's really worth doing that. Keep a register. But one thing I should say is that if you don't hear back from a journal or a publisher, if you just don't hear from them for you're well within your rights to write to them and say, please, would you let me know what's happening? And then if you don't hear back, you're quite within your rights to write to them and say, I'm withdrawing my article because I want to submit it elsewhere. You don't have to hear something because they might never get back to you. You just don't know. So you really must make sure that you're in charge of your publishing, your own material. Don't let someone else just take it over and that they own it, because it's still your material. You have the right to withdraw it. You don't have the right to just go and submit it somewhere else without, if you withdraw it, then you can submit it somewhere else. I see quite a lot of requests for specific suggestions for journals in various subjects. That's you know, the thing that the thing I haven't mentioned, and that I think is very, very important. To choose, the first step in choosing a journal for me is to look at your own bibliography. Look at the site yourself. Look into your reference list. Where have those journal articles been published? Which publishers have published those books? That's your starting point. Because if they've been publishing on that subject that you've been writing about, they're likely to be interested in publishing your work too. So that's a start. That's a starting point. It's like and then, you know, look at those journals and look at their reference lists, and, you know, see who's been publishing the sort of material that you want to publish. It sounds like it is a simple sort of rule of thumb, but it's just a way of getting started when you really don't know where to start. So look at journals or specific public. Look at those places where you've found your material. Order those, and then, you know, once you've perhaps made a list of those possibilities, then go online, look up those journals, look at their author's instructions, make sure that your work will fit there, and then make sure it's formatted and everything the way that journal wants you to format it, referencing all those things before you submit it.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, a last question for the session: how one should be aware of plagiarism?
How should one? Yes. Well, once again, I mean, there's a lot you can do with Google. You can search some text on Google. If you think something looks as though it's plagiarized, you can just put the text in Google and see if it turns up anywhere else. And even though everything isn't on Google, so you're not necessarily going to find something that's plagiarized, that's always worth a try. There are, of course, more. There are, you know, there are programs like Turnitin. There are various programs for identifying plagiarism, but you know, they're not. I don't think they're free programs. I think they're things that you need to subscribe to, and your perhaps institutions might have subscriptions to those services. So that's worth finding out. But yes, plagiarism. Yeah, you need to be careful of that. And of course, if you do a Google search, it's more likely to be a problem for editors and teachers than for authors, I would have thought, because, you know, you should look after your own work and make sure you don't plagiarize yourself, plagiarize other scholars, and make sure you cite, you reference all their works properly, and for example, you know, always, you know, if you quote somebody, provide the full source, all those things that we all know what to do. But as for identifying plagiarism, the only magic bullet I know is Google. Sorry.
Thank you, ma'am. Indeed, a very informative session. So we are concluding the session for tomorrow, and now over to Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, the convener of the workshop.
Thank you, Ankita. Thank you so much, Dr. Dooley. It was a very informative session, and you were so considerate. I could see that you have answered almost all the questions raised by the students. So thank you very much. We'll keep in touch. And it was very nice presentation, and we have recorded it also. It was broadcasted over YouTube. I think people, more than 1,000 people have seen it, and they are benefited. And I once again thank you that you replied every time, and you are very prompt on emails. Thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch for future. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. So
Ankita,
we are.
Ankita, could you please announce some informations for tomorrow's session to the
Yes, sir.
participants?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the feedback form and the follow-up form will be mailed to all the participants. And tomorrow we will be having 2 sessions. The first session is from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. by Dr. Frank Carrierios from Pittsburgh University. And the second session would start from 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. and we will be having Professor Anurag K. Agrawal from IIM Ahmedabad. So that is the schedule for tomorrow. Thank you.